Now? Oh. Well, the music you heard was the music of Davood Tabrizi, who did the music for Rocking the Foundations and
Australia Days and For All the World to See.
Yeah, but he couldn't be here tonight. We are so happy that you could all be here tonight, and there's an overflow room. We're happy if you're hearing us that you're there too, and you'll have plenty of video coverage of the night's events. First of all, I want to say that this isn't all there is. We're all going to meet up and have a party afterwards, of course, at the Bavarian Beer House. But at the end of this meeting, Rod, one of our leaders, will tell you where to go.
He'll tell you too.
Yeah. But at this moment, more seriously, I want us to recognize, respect, and reflect on being here today on the lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples, and remember that sovereignty has never been ceded. Our colleague Rachel Perkins sends her apologies, and she can't be here tonight as she's delivering the Boyer Lecture. So a big shout out to Rachel, who will probably see this tape. She's going to examine how the Uluru Statement from the Heart provides a path to ending the Great Australian Silence, which you know what it is. So anyway, Pat said to me, please, let's set aside politics and the fire for tonight and just really, there's no way to set aside the politics. Look at the films. We're going to have speaker after speaker and clip after clip, a very rich program. And, from which you're going to learn why we're here saluting our Pat. And we also have, where's Felicity? There's Felicity. Felicity is a very experienced person. So she has this, she's going to wave at the speakers when there's 1 minute to go because we've got a packed program. So speakers, if you obey Felicity, then at the end there will be a time for a few questions, we hope, or comments.
Free mic.
Free mic, as Pat puts it. But anyway, let's start with, everybody's got a first film. And you're going to see Pat's first film. It's called Burst Forth. We went in for this in those days. Well, that was 1973, and that was really 1973. And so, Pat, how did you come to tell us? And I just want to say, you'll see in that film, one film, the themes that were to haunt Pat's films for quite some time, actually. How did you come to Australia and to make Burst Forth?
Okay, it's a really long story. And so I've written some notes because if I hadn't done this, I would just get distracted by all these little stories, all these little asides, so bear with me. So I came in 1971. I was a speech pathologist. No, in 1971 I was a speech pathologist working in Stockton, California. I met and fell in love with Michael Riley, who was a student of education in Sacramento, only about 40 miles up the road from me. And Michael got a teaching job in Melbourne in January of 1972. And at that time, Australia was, there was a real shortage of teachers here, and they were hiring thousands and thousands and thousands of American and Canadian teachers to fill the places here. And so he went, but after 6 months he said, "Oh, come, why don't you come here?" I thought, oh yeah, well, I jumped at the chance because really I had been obsessed with Australia for a long time, and there are stories I could tell you about that, but I have to keep it short.
Yes?
So I thought I could work as a speech pathologist here, but that was not to be because they wouldn't accept my credentials. So I was a kept woman living out in the Dandenongs, and which I was having a really hard time with. So at Christmas that year, 9 of us Americans traveled to New Zealand to bushwalk, and we ended up meeting Fred Hollows in the Welcome Flat Hut. We had an amazing week with him, and in the end, he asked 4 of us to go over the Copeland Pass with him and his friend, and it was an incredible experience. It included encountering a blizzard, the temperature dropping 40 degrees, 120 knot winds, losing our way, 2 guys with exposure, missing the Copeland Pass, being belayed down a 150-foot rock face by ropes for the first time in the 4 of our lives, finding a welcomed barrel shelter that rocked in the wind all night. And in the middle of the night sometime, Fred just shouted out, "Oh my God, if we go, we're going to be like peas in a referee's whistle." And somehow that whole experience was really bonding, to say the least. So back to Australia and me chomping at the bit. So I decided in March 1973 I was going to leave. And I would hitchhike through Australia, Indonesia, Asia, the world, and go back to the States and get a job, because at least I knew I'd get a job there. And so when I arrived in Sydney, I rang Fred up, and he came and got me, bought me a push bike, running shoes, and took me climbing for the next 6 years. Anyway, I never left. And we were friends till he died, and I made a film about him too. So I got involved in the women's movement, the left. I became a builder's laborer. I learned still photography, and happened to go to the Blinky Bill film workshop.
Blinky Bill,
yeah, at the Sydney Filmmakers Co-op, where I made BURSTFORTH, of course. And what?
Nothing.
A 1. Oh, it was clear to me from the very start that films could make a real difference, and I never looked back. Dennis O'Rourke once said to me, Dennis. I came into filmmaking for the love of film, Pat, but you came into it from politics for what you can do. I think he was right.
But Pat, just if we have 30 seconds, what about Burst Forth?
What?
Well, what about it? How did you make that?
Oh, that's a long story, too.
Oh, okay.
I kind of,
Okay. Well, these little workshops, they had no money, no film, and they made these little films.
You had to come up with an idea, and I actually walked to the airport from Annandale to say goodbye to Fred and one time. And I thought, I've got to think of a story. So I just thought and thought. I thought, oh, yeah, the nature taking over the city, that's what I'm going to do. So that's how.
So now, Pat,
Yeah.
you have something to show from your sister. Yes.
I guess so. She sent it.
Hi, Pat. On behalf of your family and friends back home in Minnesota, I have the privilege of delivering our love, admiration, and congratulations. We are so proud of you. My name is Dar Fiske Gerber. I am Pat's older sister. I am a product of the 50s, which gave me a conservative edge. I am oh so conventional. I'm married, 2 children, 2 grandchildren, and I have lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota my entire life. Pat, on the other hand, it blossomed in the 60s. She's a free spirit, gifted, fearless, an adventurer with a backpack. She has no shackles, no pretenses. Before settling into her speech pathology job in Stockton, California in 1971, Pat the adventurer hitchhiked back and forth across the U.S. Not without incident or stories to tell, to be sure. She was always on the move whenever she could. A relentless advocate, she traveled to Washington, D.C. in the late 1960s to protest the Vietnam War. In Australia, with a camera, sound equipment, and fine film skills, she continues her activism. Pat's career has taken her around the world. She has friends in far-off places, and many scattered across the U.S. She never has to book a hotel room. When our dad was diagnosed with asbestosis and terminal lung cancer, Pat came home for a spell. She managed his diet, forced healthy juices, and prepared healthy meals. He did very well in response to the healthy regimen she had him on. Instead of a grim prognosis, he thrived and lived actively for another 7 years. In spite of living so far away, Pat has a tenacious bond to her family. We have seen some, but not all of her films. Pat was able to be in town for the screening of Love, Marriage, and Kabul at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. Last year, we arranged to screen Oyster here. And way back in the 70s, Woolloomooloo was screened here at the Walker Arts Center. In the 80s, we saw her amazing achievement, Australia Days. And each time, it was a huge thrill for us. Our family has spent over half of our lives living half a world apart from Pat. She has made a fruitful, successful life for herself in Australia, and none of us would have it any other way. When I visited her in Sydney in 2016, one day on a long drive down to her shared holiday place in central Tilba, I made a list of her many friends that I had met. There were 99 people on that list. Some of them are here tonight, I'm sure, and I send my best regards to you all. It's not a surprise to us back home that you are receiving a distinguished honor, Pat. Congratulations and love from your siblings and extended family in the USA.
One of the people that Pat met early on in her time here was Alison Lyssa. And she and Alison lived in one of those communal houses, which people, who are a bit long in the tooth will remember there were 8 of them in one house, and I'm sure they got along splendidly. Alison.
The wisdom of Pat Fiske. And a special thank you to Gillian Leigh. I saw her in 73 and said, where can I go? I've left my marriage, I've left the Liberal Party, and I want to change. And she said, 14 Australia Street, Camperdown. Thank you, Gillian. And there were builders, labourers and gay liberationists, but the person who opened the door was Pat Fiske. And I've learnt thousands of valuable things about life and documentary filmmaking from Pat. And when Pat sees some entrenched power, wealth and privilege that puts people in jeopardy or steals people from their land or threatens their well-being or their lives, whatever the difficulties, Pat has this extraordinary advice. Get active, burst forth, push on, and get rocking the foundations. So I said to Pat, where did you get this ingrained sense of justice? And she says, I looked. I took photos. And in Burst Forth, we see that moving camera in Pat's hand, not just the still photos. And there in that house in 14 Australia Street, Camperdown, a 2-storey mansion with 9 people living in it, Pat took over the laundry, the old laundry that was out the back, and lined it with black and put in a red bulb and made those photos come out of the developing tank that filled me with awe. But when she got that motion picture in her hand and she could tell the story and she could show us how whatever the jeopardy, that extraordinary jeopardy and skill of the dogman, or the jeopardy of life as it cracks apart the pavement, there was no stopping you, Pat. And we'll be seeing a clip of Push On. And at the beginning of this film, where a bunch of us cyclists, including Fred Hollows, are crossing the Harbour Bridge with no helmets and the police wondering what on earth they were going to do to stop us holding up the traffic. An interviewer asks one cyclist, aren't you worried you'll be stopped by the police? And the startlingly relevant 4 decades later answer is, no, there's too many of us. And when they arrive in triumph at North Sydney, from North Sydney to the city, we hear the voice of Fred Hollows off camera, and he says to the cyclists, you've got nothing to lose but your chains. I don't think that bit's in the clip we're going to see, but we're going to see some other brilliant clips. And then Rocking the Foundations had the length of the film, the scope of the film had leapt to 90 minutes. It was finished in 1985. And I remember during the making of it being absolutely awed by the perseverance that Pat put into making this film. And she'd already made Woolloomooloo, which had developed, as Martha said, some of those themes that we saw already in Burst Forth, that dogman and the builders' labourers. And the Woolloomooloo was focused on a short period of the builders' labourers' history and of the development of Sydney during the 60s and 70s. But Rocking the Foundation told the history of the builders' labourers from the 1940s through to 1974, with special emphasis on the Green Band period. And it won Woolloomooloo had won an AFI award in 1978 for its deeply committed presentation of an important social document. And back then I said to Pat at the time, how can you put this effort into it year after year, hour after hour, till late at night? And she said, it has to be good. And why did it have to be good? Because it mattered. And Pat is still doing this. A current project that she's working on among several, all marvellous, is called Rosemary's Way, and she's working on that one with Ros Horan. And I was privileged to see an early cut of this. And Rosemary, of the title, is of African origin out there in Western Sydney, and she's reaching out to women who are migrants and refugees and who face a daily jeopardy. As Pat said to me, they don't know their rights and no one tells them their rights. And I found I was in tears watching this brilliant film because I could see in these women's faces that the project that Rosemary has, a unique forward-looking project, I won't spoil the surprise because you'll see it on the screen when it unfolds, were having their lives changed by that project. Tears that come when you have relief and joy. And when Pat and I were out walking last Saturday morning, one of our regular walks with Jazz, you saw some pictures of Jazz come up, Jazz and Pizzazz. We started to chat to a woman out there with her dog, but she was shivering in the cold, like this. And Pat put a healing hand on her shoulder and said, relax. Because growing up there in Minnesota, Pat told us, you were cold. And when you were cold and you feel as if you're carrying the jeopardy of the weight of the world on your shoulders, you can't get the blood pumping. So I give you again the wisdom of Pat. Relax. Have confidence. Burst forth, push on, and keep rocking the foundations.
You're one of the organisers, eh?
Oh, I've had my name recorded by the police as such.
What's your name?
Jim Donovan of Lane Cove.
Jim, what are you really trying to prove today by riding across the bridge en masse?
We want to demonstrate that cycling is a feasible way of commuting that doesn't use the resources that cars do.
What sort of reaction have you had so far from the police?
Well, the police were very curious. They took my name, address and marital status. I certainly hope I don't hear from them. They want to know our plans, and they're concerned that we might clog the whole harbour bridge up.
Excuse me, do you normally ride a push bike around Sydney?
No, I would like to, but I'd like to see more or some bicycle ways first, because I don't think it's safe.
Are you worried that we might be stopped by the police when we get further down?
No, there's too many of us, really, I think. Bicycles, they'd be able to get across much quicker, I think. They're just like having a motorbike, sort of, except much nicer.
Slug is tired and weary, oh, just roll your leg across the bike and pedal on your way. The motor lobby down to Peru and daily try to stop us all with barricades and toll gates and coppers in a row. But we can weave and wander through their battlements and stop and start, turn left or right at will, for we are free from motorized impediments. We're young and old and breathing and we're never known to kill. Push on, and pedal on your bicycle and listen to the music that is humming from your wheels. Push on, it's fun and liberating, and you really ought to try it just to know how good it feels. The cars have beat in London town, Los Angeles and Tokyo, and now they're beating Sydney as they've beaten all the rest. There's nothing on the northern side but highways and approaches, so with coaches, cars and semi-trucks they're filling up the west. But we can weave and wander through their battlements and stop and start, turn left or right at will, for we are free from motorized impediments. We're young and old and breathing and we're never known to kill. Push on, and pedal on your bicycle and listen to the music that is humming from your wheels. Push on,
Excuse me, sir, as a motorist, how do you feel about the disruption by the push bikes this morning?
Well, as I'm in a terrific hurry, I feel very badly about it.
Does it worry you that you're being held up at the moment?
Not really, it's your normal, isn't it? I think we're donkeys for coming in this late, aren't we?
Excuse me, sir, what's your opinion of the action of the cyclists?
I could cut their bloody throat.
And
Can
next,
I say something?
no,
Yes. Can I? 1 second.
one.
It was fun to make. That film was really fun to make, and Mike Eels and I both got arrested, and there's a terrific story about all that. But I won't go into that either.
Because it's time for Tom Zubrycki.
Thank you, Pat. I loved that film. That's the time I really, met you. Is pretty much when I saw that film, in fact. And I think I still remember you were projecting at the Co-op for a while as well. So, but I loved it because it just that lightness of touch and wit and just the style and the humour. It's fantastic. Could we have the first slide, please, Alan? So I met Pat at the Co-op. That's where we basically all got together. In some ways, it was our film school, the Co-op. St Peter's Lane, tucked around the corner from the Cross. Who remembers the Co-op? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Anyway, that's good. We had the office upstairs, downstairs, the 80-seat cinema where people could watch films they could never see anywhere in Sydney. This was years before the internet, and they were Australian, overseas docs, short dramas, experimental films. The Co-op was also functioned as a collective run by the filmmakers themselves. We ran it, and sometimes that had its moments. I'll tell you.
It had a lot of moments.
Sometimes these meetings we had at the Co-op lasted all weekend because we had to arrive at a consensus, and that was difficult, and often it was, the boys and the girls and the experimental filmmakers versus, the social action ones. Anyway, one of the great things about the Co-op is that it was a social hub and a cultural hub. We were really great at being able to throw terrific parties, and everybody came, and it wasn't just the filmmakers, it was silk screen artists, from Sydney Uni, the F-Works Co-op, and there were a few photographers, writers, poets, and a few political rabble-rousers too, I think. It was very eclectic. And, some drugs, of course. It was the 70s, mostly pot. And I remember somebody mixed a very potent alcoholic punch as well. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, the Co-ops were our film school. It's where connections were formed, where we met other filmmakers, talked about filmmaking, went to screenings, had our own film screened there, and got involved in the distribution of those films as well. This is the office. You might see Kim Lewis there, Gail Lake. So we developed our skills from working on each other's films. I shot some video for Pat on her film. Pat recorded sound for me on my film, Waterloo. And we had similar passions. Next slide, please. We were both concerned with what was going on in the Sydney's inner city neighbourhoods, the redevelopment and destruction of those neighbourhoods. Fortunes were to be made tearing down historic precincts like the Rocks, Woolloomooloo and Victoria Street. And that's what Pat's earlier feature, Woolloomooloo, that Alison referred to, was all about. Particularly the opposition to the redevelopment led by the BLF, the Green Bands, and many supporters, and that led to rocking the foundations. Next slide, please. And just so happened that I made a film called Waterloo, just down the road, in another part of Sydney, where the main developer was the Housing Commission building huge high-rise, or trying to. So it's a bit of synchronicity there. And of course we met at the pub every Friday night, and with builders, labourers, and the old Libertarian Push and a whole lot of other people. It was memorable times. Anyway, we decided, to reach out beyond the co-op to the broadcasters. And there's only one broadcaster at that stage, that was the ABC, and they were showing their documentaries, but they made in-house. And we had to really fight very hard to persuade them to acquire our films. And the treatment we got sometimes was appalling, I must say. Next slide. I remember Pat being furious when Rocking the Foundations was programmed by the ABC on a Sunday afternoon slot without any prior publicity, not even noted in the TV guides.
On Palm Sunday.
On Palm Sunday.
All of the people that would have wanted to watch the film were on the Palm Sunday march.
Yeah. And it's apparently, we heard at the time that the head of Doco at the ABC felt that the film didn't have a wide general interest out around Australia to warrant a primetime slot.
And it's still being shown today.
And there was too specifically a Sydney story, which was actually the problem I had when the ABC rejected my first film, Waterloo, too. So as the years went on, some of our co-op crowd became successful filmmakers. Others got jobs in academia. Others went into distribution or got jobs in screen agencies. And some, like Phil Noyce, went to Hollywood. And still others headed north towards Nimbin. But Pat and I stayed with independent documentary, making our own films, and now as producers helping others make theirs. We became active members of the ADG, served on the board for many years, found ourselves on many documentary committees and lobby groups, too numerous to mention. In fact, I think we're running out of acronyms. There's Indie Doco, Film Action, AID, anyway. So we've been through the Doco wars together, and I'm sure there'll be others who will need to fight in the foreseeable future. Pat, I'm very lucky to know you, collaborate with you, and have you as my friend. Let's do another bushwalk together soon.
Can I just say one other thing? So I was very angry, as Tom said, about, Rocking the Foundation, getting no publicity, no audience, nothing. So I talked to all of the resident action groups, all of the BLs, and I told them what had happened. Well, they all wrote to the ABC, didn't they? And I one day got a call from Jonathan Holmes saying, "Pat, call off your dogs." And said, "Okay, we will buy it again for the same amount. It was $10,000 or something." They bought it again. They did the most amazing publicity campaign. They made the most amazing trailer, and it just went crazy, like in terms of audience. So that was great.
So let's take a little look.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Some people seem to have this irresistible urge to tear down and rebuild. There's a lot of money to be made. Hotels, office blocks, high-rise. The developers make a fortune, the laborers make a living. The workers, the ones who build the monuments, then tear them down again. All in a day's work. But for 5 years in the 1970s, the builders' labourers of New South Wales called a halt, took the centre stage, call it what you will, they made history. Like thousands of others, I got involved with this union. In one way or another, we were swept up in what became a powerful social movement. When the builders' labourers put the environment and people ahead of their own jobs. And it was all the more extraordinary because it sprang from the least expected of places.
We're going to talk about it, not yet, but we'll have Stuart Young, who ended up editing in the end. There was a lot. It was a really tough film, and the persistence that it took. I mean, we had everything go wrong, including faulty stock and faulty camera at the same time, and figuring that out. Any cinematographer will know what I'm talking about, and thing after thing after thing. And Pat just persisted and persisted. Anyway, so finally she arrived at Stuart Young to help her finish the film.
Good evening, Pat. Stuart Young here. Welcome to your life on the big screen. I'm standing on the dry shoreline of Lake Wobbegong, Minnesota. Go away. Like most Australians, they're everywhere in the world today. Unlike the mythical Lake Wobbegong, your documentary career has been far from mythical. I've known you for over 40 years, and during this timeline, your dedication and contribution to the art of documentary has been outstanding throughout. Making your first documentary is no small task, especially if you have no backing. Right? Wrong. It can be done, it's just harder, and it requires you to surround yourself with a group of like-minded people who are willing to follow you into the battlefield of independence, documenting a slice of life. I admire and salute you tonight for your compassion, inspiration, zeal, and enthusiasm for your art, for it is the only thing that will ever get things done.
Wow.
Sweet.
Oh, Pat. You know how you know what your favourite film is? It's the one you've seen the most. And I have to say that for me, Rocking the Foundations is right up there with Vertigo.
Wow.
So, Pat, I just remember a lot of high buildings. I shot quite a bit of it, and I'm very proud. Those shots look not bad for a young person. And we used to roam around on the tops of buildings, and I remember the big thing that a cinematographer must remember is that when you're getting back to get the shot, don't go over the edge. And so, but Pat was much more bold than me, and you shot the thing that you think I was afraid to shoot, but I wasn't there. So tell about it.
Oh, just I remember she was there.
I
but,
wasn't there.
Like memories. Anyway, whoever it was afraid to get up in the box and go up in the box. So I had to take the camera and get on the box and go up.
You saw the box. The box is there's an interview.
Box.
in a box with a dogman in the box being hoisted up and up and around and around and around while
And there's-
Pat's interviewing him.
And there's one shot, I think, of it. Anyway, but yeah, so it was hard. It was really hard shoot, and it took so long. I mean, you know, the making of the film took a really long time, and sometimes I had to go off and work to sustain my life, and make money and try to come back to it every once in a while, and so that's why it took 6 years. It took 6 years. Woolloomooloo took 5 years, and Rocking took 6 years. So.
And so to earn money, what did you do?
Taught swimming. Sometimes I taught swimming, but also, you know, I became a filmmaker. I love making films, but then I also wanted to be a cinematographer, and I went to Film Australia to try to get a job to, you know, to learn how to be a cinematographer. And like other people we know, they said, nah. So then I thought, well, maybe you know, speech pathology, speech therapy, you know, it's sound. It's maybe I could, you know, learn how to do sound. And Kathy Goldman and I bought a Nagra together. She worked for ABC Radio, although she never ended up using the Nagra, but I did. And I did the sound. For me, it was like, okay, I can make documentaries with two people, then I can get a cinematographer and I can be the sound recordist, and so I can direct and sound record, you know, like it was perfect for me, and I did that for many films. I mean, with Martha, with, you know, with Erika, with John Witteron, with, yeah, like lots. So it was really handy, and when you're only two of you can travel with whoever you're filming. You can just get in the back seat or get in the back of the four-wheel drive, and I've got to wrap up. Okay.
Okay, well, the next thing is Gillian Leigh. Where are you?
I'm not sure which came first. I met Pat soon after she arrived in Sydney, and when she was living in Australia Street with common friends, including Alison. And we were, after she did the Blinky Bill workshop, she then went on to do a women's film workshop, I think it was 1974, yes, which Martha ran. And Pat and I were both in that workshop. And in that workshop, we worked together on a little 7-minute film with someone called Virginia Katz, who has since vanished from our lives. If anyone knows Virginia Katz, we would like to meet her again. But anyway, we made a film called Hearts and Spades. It was a drama about men and women, men's groups of the 70s, murder, love and hate, and the washing up. The thing I most remember is being with Pat, hot splicing, 16mm black and white film. At the end, towards the end of the film, well, at the very end of the film, there are sort of, I think there starts out as 15 frame cuts, goes down to 7, goes down to 3, and I think we even tried to get down to 2, and it's the main character, a woman, hugging her boyfriend and then shooting him with a rifle, and there's sort of very fast intercutting. Well, if any of you have ever done hot splicing, I've never done it since, but I learned something, Martha. I think we both did. But I seem to remember it might have been at your house. We were in a very hot little room, and there we were with the hot splicer, and we were hot, hot, hot in every way. And of course, if anybody... anyone can disagree with me, but Pat has the best legs in the industry. It was very difficult and hot in, as I say, in every way. Pat, in her usual fashion, stuck through it with me. I mean, it was the splicers kept coming apart because such tiny pieces of film. We became friends, and we were both in women's liberation and in what I'd call the filmmaking wing of women's liberation throughout the 70s and 80s. She worked on other films of mine in her capacity as a sound recordist, notably Doled Out, which was made by a collective. It was about youth unemployment in the 80s, made by a collective, Oh My. Decisions were made by whoever could drink the most and stay up latest, which wasn't me and Pat. We won't say more about that. And she also worked on a film called Something Creative, which was commissioned by the Crafts Council of Australia, of which the best thing I can say is that it's a good account of Viv Bin's Mother's Memories project, which was about our mothers' craft work that they did, like doilies and tablecloths and knitting and what have you. She worked on the ill-fated Coal is Coal, in brackets, Coke is Coke, Real is Real, about Hunter Valley open-cut coal mining, which was never finished but should have been. And, you know, it's a great tragedy, really, and some of that footage is gone forever. Nevertheless, we had a long friendship. Well, it's still a long friendship from that time to this. And we were both, as Tom has mentioned, around the co-op together. We were also on, I've just remembered this, in fact, on the board of Film News, which was the co-op's newspaper. There were a lot of very interesting debates in those meetings about what article should be on the front page, and they got to be very heated at various times. She's a great and solid friend, and to me she's been a friend and a mentor, someone I can ring up when I've got problems with my filmmaking and say, what will I do about this? Or, I don't like this contract, what should I do? You know, so she's very solid, Pat. She's one of the few who have managed to make a consistent sort of living out of documentary directing. There's, you know, a few handfuls, one handful maybe. She managed this because of her skill and persistence and her great filmmaking skills, but also because she had other strings to her bow. She's mentioned teaching swimming. She also, well, and she's mentioned sound recording. She did transcripts for other people's films. And finally, as we know, moved into documentary producing. I was not someone who could handle making a living that way, and I'm one of the ones that went into academia and made less films. I'm showing one clip from Following the Fence Line in a minute. Pat always loved the verite or observational style, but in Australia you always have either broadcasters or producers standing over you to lay in loads of voiceover and add in interviews. Sometimes she wanted to add in interviews. Oyster, that Pat produced, is a good example of relatively pure observational work. Pat produced, directed and shot and recorded, and did you edit as well? Following the Fence Line, which is about a bunch of women riding motorbikes around Australia to raise awareness of breast cancer. Here's one observational sequence from it. Watching the film the second time the other day, I found it very moving, and in fact it moved me to tears. But let's watch that clip, please, Alan. Thanks.
Which one is the timer, Paige?
Although they mostly hid it from the camera, the inevitable personality clashes had been surfacing for a while. By Darwin, the distances were longer, the weather hotter, the women tired. Tempers were frying. Splits in the group started to emerge. When partners of two of the women turned up unexpectedly, the presence of the men became a catalyst, causing the tensions to erupt. I wasn't quite prepared for the confrontation that was to follow.
I mentioned to Jackie and Margaret that it was lovely for them to have a holiday here with their fellows here in Darwin, but that should be the finish of it. And I just want to throw that open for discussion.
I had a lot of soul searching, and
Keep going. Keep going.
And I thought if this was all going to create such a big problem in a group of women, I felt that maybe I should leave. So I've asked Brian to meet me in Catherine. And if there appears to be a problem in the group, then yes, I'll leave. But my objective on this trip was to get the message across about breast cancer. That to me was my primary purpose. and any peripheral stuff that came into it was insignificant.
It's hard.
And I think as a group we've got to start gelling this together. We've got to get strengths from one another. There seems to be a lot of pettiness going on that disturbs me greatly, and I wasn't aware of how much until I started to speak to some of the women, and that disturbs me. We've got to work as a team, and we've got to get strength from one another. Anyway, I mean, I'd really like to know what your idea on this is. I mean, I'm having a problem dealing with this.
Well, I think I'd like quite often when things like this come up, and the same with me the other day, sometimes some people speak of, oh, we, but no one will ever own up. Now, if they can't own up, it's not very significant. So I think here and now we should say, who's happy, who's not happy about the situation.
Well, I'm 100% happy with men being on the trip because...
No,
they're not on the trip.
No, but no, I mean, with us on the rest days, or wherever you want them.
I think for a lot of women, there's a very personal achievement or a personal thing that they want to achieve by doing this solely as a female, without men around. Whether the men help or whether they don't is immaterial. It's having a group of women doing something that they want to do without anybody else being involved in it. And I feel fairly strongly about that.
Yeah, okay, who else? Betty, you were wanting to say something? I want to go around the lot.
No, it is a women's trip, and okay, the boys obviously have taken it on their own bat to actually do this and to come, but I agree with Kay that it should be, if they were to come and tag along or whatever, not to be in the same area with the women. I think we've got to stay as a single group of women that are going out there and passing on this message. And
I feel that a lot of you women don't understand some of the things that us breast cancer women have been through, and it is a ride for our achievements. I'm a fairly strong person. I've had to live away from my husband for 5 months in hospital and another 2 months at another time. Perhaps you women haven't had to do some of these things. I'm in this to try and help other women out there that have got breast cancer, to spread the word that there is a life after breast cancer. Unless you've looked down that barrel yourself, nobody really knows what you've been through. So I don't mind if the guys meet up with their women on rest days. That doesn't worry me at all. But I think as a ride in a whole, we should stay together as women.
Ross. Thanks.
I don't think there's much more I can say after that. I definitely think there's a subtle influence that the men have on the group. As Betty was saying, I think what Betty was trying to say is that it takes away from the achievement a little bit, because we as a group of women should have been, well, not that I had a bike, but should have been able to get the bikes to the places and got them organised as part of the whole, part of the group dynamic.
Rachel Perkins obviously can't be here tonight, and she was so busy trying to write the Boyer lecture that she couldn't even do a piece to camera. She just, and I can't wait. Personally, I cannot wait to hear the Boyer lectures. I think it's going to be stunning. But Rachel rang me in 1996 sometime and asked me if I would like to go up to Yuendamu and make a film about the night patrol that had operated in the past for the ABC. And I, of course, said, oh, yes. What a great opportunity. I don't have to raise any money. And also it gave me an opportunity to go back to Yuendamu, and I'd been with Digby on a film called On Ways of Thinking, I think. And how long were we there in Yuendamu?
About 4 or 5 weeks.
4 or 5 weeks before, so it felt familiar to me, and it was great to be able to go back and spend some time. But this time I was there for 3 or 4 months, and John Witteron came up to shoot the film, and then Denise Haslam came to edit the film at the Walbury Media Center, and we had some great adventures, which I can't go into, of course, but she might. But I remember, okay, I liked, took the job and then thinking, how do you make a film about the night patrol women when they are really a lot older now, and they're not so nimble. And, you know, and I remember walking around the community, back and forth, and way out into the bush, and thinking. Then I thought, okay, it came to me that I have to make the film a film about the celebration, celebrate them, to make a tribute to the work they had done, and done so well. So once I had that idea, it kind of freed me up, and I was able to go forward. But I was stuck for a while, like, you know, because I hadn't, I had to go up there and meet everyone and do a lot of research while up there. And I was really glad when John came. I was really glad when Denise came, because it made it, you know, it made it easier to talk things out with them. But, you know, like, it was hard because we couldn't always find the women, because they were out maybe looking for food, you know, out bush looking for the food, or there was sorry business. So it was a really protracted filming period, which, you know, like, you know, it's like, it's always that way. You just have to go with the flow. And I think that it was really interesting to live in the community for 4 months. I really enjoyed that, even though there were a lot of hard times.
Does she have another minute? Because there's something else you wanted to say.
What did I want to say?
You wanted...
Your memory is not always very good.
You wanted to talk about the relationship, the people around the co-op encouraging Aboriginal filmmaking.
Oh, well, that's what Rachel wanted to talk about, was the, that she says that all of us, Tom, Martha, myself, and quite a few other people, really helped them get off the ground and got a lot of things started. And she said that she's very thankful for that.
And this was by not stepping into other people's places, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just have a clip of Night Patrol.
Nambejo ngolona lo badolo mangonyango tanga jogo munga kulango wadi jilawa ngonigalo mabirili wadi badolo pamajo
Tingi janal mata puetsane ngapaka ngala nyantrangele ngola ko jago
namba nyoro keren pan kamemba depitan laide ke bajam nyoro ya para Chunga jala ko jala ya pakula wakareja yang pala ko nyambo ko jaga palyano kare ya parlere nyena ngula wa na le jingi jaja
Keep it short.
Yes, I will keep it short because the next person is going to be Erika Addis, and I think all of us have been very fortunate in having wonderful cinematographers around like Erika and Jono Witteron, you know, Erika.
I met Pat when I moved to Sydney in 1977 and moved into a house, not in Australia Street, just around the corner, with Alison, Lyssa and Helen Grace, and a little bit later on, Mandy King. And we, I think that we first worked together on either A Most Attractive Man or For Love or Money. One of the two. I'm not sure which one. Anyway, and we might have some pictures of both of those shoots in a little while, or not.
Maybe not.
The thing is that we, Pat and I have worked together and we've travelled around the world to many, many places. We've travelled from the outback of beyond Burke to Nepal, to Eritrea, to Japan, and to... beautiful. Look at that. Amazing. I'm always astonished when a computer doesn't work. I don't know why. I've had lots of experiences of computers not working. And we've mostly worked together with Pat, directing as well as shooting, and it's an incredibly close and intimate relationship, the documentary cinematographer and sound recordist. So I want to tell you a couple of stories about our travels together. One story is... utterly upstage. Totally upstage.
Life of a filmmaker, isn't it?
So there was a time. So the thing is that I've always said, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, have said that Pat has many lives, and I think you've used up quite a few of them. So there was the time when we were travelling back from Eritrea. We'd taken the plane to, we changed planes in Khartoum and then in Bahrain, and we were on the long haul home. The eye doctors were in business class. The documentary filmmakers were in cattle class. Pat was in the section behind me. The lights were down, everyone had dinner, we were mostly asleep. And the woman who was sitting in the seat next to Pat had been gone for some time. She'd gone to the toilet, she was gone quite a long time. And when she returned, she was very closely followed by a man. The woman sat down next to Pat. The man looked at Pat and said, "Get out of that seat." To which she replied, "Get fucked." A little bit like that. I wasn't there, I didn't actually hear it, but I imagine that's what it was like. And instantly, his hands came straight towards her. He put his hands around her throat and pushed her straight to the back of the seat, choking her totally. She could not move, she could not breathe, she couldn't shout. Whoa. He loosened his grip ever so slightly. She drew breath and let out a blood-curdling scream, which shocked him so much that he actually stepped back with the shock of it. No one witnessed this. The only person who saw it was the woman sitting next to Pat. If he had not let go of her, if he had not let go of her throat, we might not be here tonight. So, you live to tell the tale. And there's a lot more to that tale, but that was the kind of like the kernel of it. So one of the things that documentary sound recorders do is save the lives and the asses of their cinematographers in all kinds of ways. And there was a time we were in Naples. We were working on Ruth Cullen's film, The Tightrope Dancer, about Vali Myers. We were in Naples, and we'd been there for a day or two or three. It was Easter time. The streets were absolutely packed with people, and we were going to lunch. And Ruth and Vali and Gianni and Pat were up ahead, and I was, as I sometimes do, I was dawdling behind because I was looking at so many things. And I looked up to see another man, different man from the other man, looking straight at me, and his hands were coming straight towards my throat, and I went, "Oh, no, he's after the camera that I've borrowed from Trish Fitzsimons that I've got, just over my body. He's after Trish's camera." And he grabbed me by the throat, grabbed all of my clothes, and he just dragged me off balance and through these crowds of people, and I just was screaming at the top of my lungs as he dragged me through the street, down a narrow alleyway, and the next thing I knew, Pat was right behind me, screaming at the top of her lungs. The guy let go of me. He was after the chain that I was wearing so stupidly. I was wearing a beautiful gold chain that I thought no one had seen. That's what he was after, not the camera. And Pat flew after him. He leapt onto the motorcycle that was waiting for him down the lane, and Pat narrowly missed him by that much. Thank Christ. Otherwise, there might have been more tears and more blood on the pavement. So Pat thought that he had gotten away with getting the chain. He didn't. It was in pieces. I still had a hold of it. I picked all those pieces up, and I still have the chain today.
There was also another twist to that story.
Yes.
There was.
Do you want to get up and say it?
Ruth, do you want to come up?
Yes, Ruth, you're next. Anyway.
Come on up.
You're up.
Come on up. Ruth Cullen is going to tell us another part of the story.
Hi, I met Pat in the early 80s, I think, through Dennis O'Rourke. And I was one of the directors on Australia Days. But yes, Naples was pretty wild in those days. It was 1989. So Valley and I were walking ahead chatting, and I heard, "Fuck you!" This big primal scream, and Pat and Erika were really fit. When we were filming, we had to climb every day to her house, basically. She lived in a wild cliff, and they were really, carrying the gear up and down the cliff and big 16mm batteries and everything. So they were really strong. So they took off after the guy and just disappeared. And Valley and I were just sitting there. It was really quiet. We thought, oh no, we're in a really dodgy part of Naples. What's happening? And you came back with the chain. And I won't say I told you so, Erika, but
She told me so.
I did.
I was an idiot. Total idiot.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I think you can stay here, but I just want to add one more very small story, which was that one time when we were in Eritrea, Pat and I, with Fred Hollows, Fred said to us as we walked by, "These two would look better if you wore high heels." To which Pat and I both basically said,
I don't really have any more to say, Pat. I just think you're amazing. I love working with you. You're a great friend. You're a great filmmaker, and more. See ya.
Thank you, Erika and Ruth. Now then, as some of you know and some of you are hiding, behind every great documentary director stands a great editor. And, a lot of people don't admit this, but we admit it. And Pat and I have been among the favoured group who has worked with a number of really wonderful editors, none more so than Denise Haslam.
The first slide, Thank you, Martha. That was a bit,
No, I know, but it's true.
So, Pat asked me here tonight to talk about the whiteboard. So exciting, so exciting. After 40 years of working and travelling with Pat, and Pat taking me on adventures that I would never have been game to do on my own, like the time she picked up a couple of guys in Jaipur in India, and they asked her to come over to their place to watch a puppet show. Like, yeah, Pat, sure. So she talked me into going with her, just in case there was any funny business. And we left all our valuables behind and agreed that only one of us would drink alcohol if offered. Can I have the next slide, Alan? So they took us to their home, this roadside tent. And in that tent, we saw the most beautiful, exquisite puppet show that you can imagine. And then they even escorted us back home to the hotel. They're pretty gorgeous guys. All the time, I followed her into the Sam Desert, only to see her disappear over the dunes on a camel. All the time, when she promised some elders in Nirrupi, Central Australia, that she would help them collect ochre. We followed them up this amazingly high, the next one, Alan, massive massive mesa. We walked all the way up there into a tiny hole in the rocks to dig ochre from a claustrophobic mine. And the next one, when one of the elderly men took a turn, we had to finish mining, and I was actually so glad to get out of there. I can't believe how terrified I was in there. But when we returned to the car, I realised I'd lost my keys. So Pat went all the way back up there to find them. So she went all the way back up, and she did find them in the mine. In the mine. I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea how she found them, but she did. So she saved the day that day. And so the next one, Al. So together we've shared, and the next one, we've shared loving and losing dogs and burying them, and days in Bermagui, drinking, eating and doing jigsaw puzzles. And for 30 years, we've sat next to each other at the Sydney Film Festival. F30, F31. But back to the whiteboard, that's what she was me to talk about. It was big. It was about, I don't know, 3 metres long, 1.5 metres deep. It took up the whole wall of the cutting room. It was how Pat sorted out the 1,000,001 things going on in her head at once. As you know, that's what's going on. My first encounter with the whiteboard was in 1988 on Australia Days. So very briefly, this is the film Pat and Dennis O'Rourke conjured up one drunken night to document the bicentennial of Invasion Day. Then they coerced all their doco friends across the country to film whatever was happening that day, different aspects of that day. Then they got the ABC to give us all their coverage for the day, then the footage from all the other broadcasters from the day, then the radio stations. The footage count was massive, but they don't call a bowerbird for nothing. Dennis cut, we have the next one. Dennis cut with Tim Litchfield on a 6 plate. For all those people only working digital now, this is what we used to work on. That's a 6 plate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Pat and I worked on an 8 plate. 2 heads, 2 pictures. So the next one, Al.
And then Dennis went away. We never.
Haven't got that far yet, Pat. Sorry. Mornings, Pat would come in and scribble out ideas she'd had overnight. Then we would sit and stare at the whiteboard for hours, arrows everywhere, rub-outs, restarts. But not only did the film go up, all Pat's appointments, phone calls, anything she needed to do. So while I put up scenes, Pat would put up sound bites. The thing is, Pat loves sound. I know she said she wanted to be a cinematographer, but she actually loves sound. She loves to dance and she loves rhythm. She loves layering her films with different perspectives, so you're constantly working on overlays of music, voiceovers, radio, anything that can add a beat or progress the story's depth. Today, with digital tracks, you don't think twice about doing this, but back then we had 2 sound heads, so we were sort of working, constantly cutting in and diagonal cuts and all sorts of things just to get those overlays working. Finally, there's the humour. Pat and I are always saying to each other, that was a joke. Because it isn't always obvious. There is a cultural difference. Somehow, though, we managed to find common ground. So the clip I'm going to show you from Australia Days shows an example of the sound overlays and the dry and not so dry humour. A warning to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the audience that there are images of deceased persons in this clip. There may be. Also a warning to everyone. Much of this clip may make you cringe.
200 years, and the first fleet has arrived to
A truly
great
superb
applause
shot
around
of this
Southend,
fleet
and,
headed by
massive,
Soren Larsen
spectator fleet, as you can see.
into Sydney Harbour.
That's the
right
beautiful
now.
sight of the Phillips Choice race
pumping.
leading
This is,
the fleet.
well, I've never seen anything
11
like this before. So many craft out there to welcome the first fleet. And
I've
how
been out every
appropriate
Boxing
that
Day now
they've
for
done
10
this
years,
great
I've never
deed.
seen
Probably, well, walk across the water by stepping on boats there. I think.
It's lovely having them there because they were there 200 years ago.
Who are we talking
We're
about?
talking about the Aboriginal protest.
What
We're
were you
camped
saying?
there. Well, they were there 200 years ago. And something. I have this wish that when the first fleet comes past, their anger will subside for a while and they'll feel happier about it and get caught up in the.
Why would they feel happy about it, seeing the first
I
fleet?
suppose it's a wish fulfillment of mine, isn't it, really? That they'll somehow think of the joyousness of the nation. And in my opinion, I must say, if you compare it to the other countries that have been overrun by the whites and what they've done to their native population, I think Aborigines hopefully have fared better than many.
You said earlier
it's
that
a thin
better
argument,
than-
but
Sorry?
it's a thin argument, but it holds some weight.
200 years ago, this country was invaded. It was invaded by people that came in and claimed this country under the lie of terra nullius. Empty land. It's not an empty land. It was a land that's been occupied since time immemorial. The problems that were created out of the arrival of the First Fleet are still very much the problems that we experience today. Dispossession, poverty, second-rate citizenship, all those sorts of things. We want to bring that to the world attention especially. But most of all, we want to say that today, this is a year of mourning. But it's also a celebration of survival, because we've come through a genocide that's been so vicious and so intense that it's amazing that we've survived. We're the oldest living culture in this world, and we're proud of it.
What do you think is happening in Sydney right at this very moment?
Well, they'd all be down on Botany Bay or somewhere where those ships are coming in, and they'd, Lady Di and Charles would be there, and, all the other foreigners that they brought over for the Australian Day. And I suppose they'd be the biggest. If it wasn't an old Australian, he wouldn't be away. He'd be in the pub somewhere having a beer, I suppose. Yeah, or at the races.
Probably protesters marching
Mother
about.
ratbags, yeah. They're most, I think all them protesters are mainly the students, aren't they? Educated, well-educated students, probably all on the dole.
Nothing much has changed, really. It's like it was yesterday. So the whiteboard came out again in 1992 to do For All the World to See, Pat's loving tribute to Fred Hollows. Again, a massive amount of footage. But Pat wanted me to show this clip coming up because she told me it reminds her of why she likes working with an editor and not cutting it herself. When I saw this interview, I immediately said to Pat, that's the end of the film. And she couldn't believe it. It blew her away, and it's the end of the film. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for working with me. Thank you for your adventures. And thank you simply for being my friend.
Watch out, that's a very hot fire. Last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, Emma rang me up from Jindabyne and said, Daddy, can we go camping with, out in the bush with somebody? And I said, yeah. And I said, and Gabby? And they said, no, Gabby doesn't like camping. And, well, I mean, our kids already like the sort of things I like doing. And, well, I'd like them to realise that
most that you really only accomplish yourself when you get involved with other people's welfare. And I think they're learning that, you know, the basic sort of socialisation, which is the essence of the human animal as distinct from a non-human animal. And I think they're learning that. And I think they'll learn it, I mean, I don't think it matters whether I'm dead and gone. I think they'll learn it from Gabby in any case. So, I mean, I'm not going to leave a fucking sermon for my children, for Christ's sake, you know. No longer mourn for me when I am dead than you shall hear the sullen surly bell give warning to this world that I am dead from this vile world with vilest worms to dwell. So, you know, I'm not going to do a John Donne or one of those sort of bastards. Go on, Patty, got another question.
First time I ever had an ending before we started. That was great. Thank you, Denise.
Well, Pat, you want to say something about our next speaker?
Well, who is the next speaker?
It's Mitzi.
Oh, Mitzi! Yeah, just come up and talk, Mitzi. I don't want to introduce you.
I'll stick with tradition and
okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So, oh my God, all those stories, all those memories. I remember being in Italy with Ruth and Erika and Pat and on Australia Days. And anyway, we've got to be quick. I met Pat in the very early 1980s in an editing room. I'd stumbled into Filmworks, which some of you might remember, in Chippendale, curious, looking for work as an assistant editor. And I met a whole generation of documentary filmmakers, and Gill, who was one of them, offered me a job. And I knew nothing about documentary or editing. And little did I know that that impulse would change my life forevermore, and that I would be devoted to documentary ever since. So Pat and I were in adjoining edit suites.
There's a door between.
So you have the same memory, I just was about to check. She was cutting Rocking the Foundations, at that time with Jim Stevens, say no more, and I was assisting Gill, and we had adjoining rooms, and it was a film about an anti-logging movement in Tasmania, I think, and then I worked on one of Tom Zubrycki's earliest films, Chimera, Diary of a Strike, as an assistant editor. And the editors would go home, and Pat and I would stay on, and I'd be filing trims, and Pat, you were probably also filing trims, and working till late. And I remember, I must have been about 22, and I think, Pat, you were about 36. And we talked and we talked and we laughed, and I basically fell in love with her, is the story, and we spent a lot of time together. First just hanging out, and then she introduced me to so many people. Actually a whole generation of filmmakers who I also met from working at Filmworks. And so it all began there for me. Pat worked with me on a couple of films, and it was great to have Pat with me on one of my own films because she was always a great troubleshooter. And this is a photo of Pat when she was living at Francis Street, which, see, Pat knew so much more than me about filmmaking, and she, having worked as a sound recordist and a director, and many years before I knew anything. And so we started doing a lot together. We travelled across the country together. She flew over to Perth when I was living there, and then we drove back across the country together and had the most amazing trip. At that time at Francis Street, there were many wonderful people that lived there. That was the era of Robin Laurie and Circus Oz, and people coming and going, Therese Cashew and Scott Grayland and Michael Snelling and a whole host of people. We travelled across the country through Esperance and across the Nullarbor and around the coast of South Australia, sleeping in swags and camping, and
eating fresh oysters, and of course visiting millions of people along the way, because Pat knows people everywhere, as you've heard. Pat knows people from South Australia to New York City and every place in between. And I'm one of very few friends who went to Minnesota and met Pat's family in Minnesota. And this is Pat sitting on the front steps of the house she grew up in Minnesota. And it was very special to be there and to meet your family. And this is Pat with her sister Nancy. And I think there's a photo of the whole family as well with me there, which was interesting because I saw an earlier photo of the whole family and everyone's standing in exactly the same position. See? You saw the photo before, but this has just got me in there as a random. So she's a great party girl, Pat. She loves to eat and drink and, of course, dance, and we've done a lot of dancing together over the years. And we worked out that if you can dance together, you can probably also work together very well, and we discovered that we worked really well together. So as well as sharing travel, we've shared dogs. Pat actually introduced me to the love of a dog, and now I have two. And Pat was one of the few friends at my wedding. She was at my daughter's birth. She's the godmother of my daughter, Nadia. And so we've shared many, many things in life, including walking most Thursday mornings with the three dogs. But this is meant to be about her contribution to the film industry, I know that, but there's been lots of film stories, so I thought I'd tell some more personal stories. And apart from making many wonderful films of her own, as you've heard, as a director and producer, she has made a huge contribution to the film industry and to the next generation of filmmakers in this country. And that was seen most clearly when we worked together closely as co-heads of documentary here at AFTRS over 6 years in a job share role. And once again, and we worked with Michelle Thistlethwaite here, and her problem solving. Pat's always solving problems, and her generosity and thoughtfulness and creativity and always ethics really shines through. We would drive out to North Ryde and hand over from the previous day. We agreed on everything. We could finish each other's sentences. We completely trusted each other. And that's really unique and really valuable. And when we left AFTRS, we worked together in a business that I started teaching documentary to primary school kids called Sprout. And she was brilliant as usual, and it was always so much fun. And we employed some of our ex-students. And we're still very close to all of those AFTRS documentary students that we guided through those years. They were very special years. So as you've heard, Pat is a fiercely loyal friend, and nothing is too much trouble. She goes out of her way to help and support and be there. And I don't think she realises how deeply loved and appreciated she is, which is why nights like this are so important. Pat's given so much to the industry and to so many of us who've worked alongside her or learnt from her. And this documentary business is really hard, as you all know. And Pat, you're one of the shining lights, and you've made an enormous difference to so many of us. So thank you, and please continue to do all that you do.
Now we have two of their students who are now prominent filmmakers in their own right.
I'm a bit far away from the microphone. Can you hear me? Yep. Pat Fiske, 3 words. Calm, teacher, listener. I honestly spent most of my time at AFTRS thinking that someone had made a big administration error letting me into the place. Imposter syndrome, anxiety times 10. But over that 18 months, Pat helped instill in me, in spite of myself, that I was a filmmaker. Being in the documentary department, we flew under the radar. Those poor drama directors. In documentary department, the focus was off us, so we broke the rules. We played with form. We shot on film, 35mm no less, that we found. And by the way, this was in the digital age, so it was even harder to get your hands on it. Used animation, live orchestral records. It was documentary heaven. We met some amazing international filmmakers, and let's not forget the misadventures. Does anyone remember the Byron Bay AIDC? Yes. what happens on tour stays on tour. And Pat got Mads, my now work wife and business partner, a gig filming a story with Cirque du Soleil, and we got free tickets for years every time they rolled into town. It was the best job. We walked out of the place with a slate of films. The doors were opened, and here we are. Her leadership style, her teaching style was to lead from the back, support and nurture, let us fail, and cheered on our successes. She was our backstop. We made mistakes, but she was always there when the shit hit the fan. What did Pat teach me? Problems are there to be solved. Don't stress out too much. Stand up for what you believe in. Hang out with dogs. And remember to listen.
We had a slide gag there, but we'll just keep working on that. So we put a call out to documentary students of Pat's, and we asked them to give us 3 words that describe Pat. And my 3 words were calm, incorruptible, and a truth seeker. And Addis was absolutely a turning point in terms of becoming a real documentary filmmaker. It was the first time I could spend time making documentary films and just learning about them, and I made heaps of mistakes while I was there, but Pat was always there to champion me and us on, and also to just champion the basic premise of that documentary was a good thing and that we should have it in our national film school, to get people to see the extraordinary and kind of wild and beautiful thing that documentary making is. The crew that we reached out to ignored our kind of request for 3 words to describe Pat and just wrote us quite a lot of stuff, like much more than 3 words each, but we thought we'd just read some of the quotes out. Dear Pat, we salute you. In 2002, I was in awe of you, the American lefty who quietly infiltrated the AFTRA's documentary department. Your films are classic political history work, and they rocked my world when I first watched them. Things don't often go according to plan, and you gave me one of the best pieces of advice, simple, sharp and effective for a student in production meltdown. You just said, wait and let things cool down. Exactly right. It's also great advice for dealing with life. That's from Kathy Sport.
And by the way, Kathy produced my first film at film school, so that was probably about me. And by the way, Kathy came up from Adelaide to be here. Where are you, Kathy?
Yay!
Rocking the Foundations has influenced me in a huge way. I think I've watched it a total of 6 times now. The most influential aspect was hearing Pat Fiske narrating. Up till then, most of the Australian documentaries of the era had been male-dominated. And here, this kick-ass, multi-layered, politically complex documentary made by a woman, Rocking the Foundation served as an exceptional research tool, putting faces to names, and spurred me down an investigative path that I might not have journeyed on had I not seen Pat's film. Blue Lucerne. That's from Blue Lucerne, yeah.
This is another one. Folk always talk about the importance of story, but Pat taught me a story mostly needs a soul. For a story without a soul is not a story at all. Pat taught me about sound recording simply by setting off on a motorbike and doing it all herself. What an inspiration. Pat taught me that filmmaking is a lesson in physical presence, but simply being fit and present is not enough either. She taught me a story must have empathy for the worker and those without voice. I'm sorry I cannot be there to tell you these things in person, Pat. With thanks and gratitude, love always, Rob Nugent.
And guess who this one is, Pat? Guess who? I have a story about Pat. Since I was wheelchair-bound for most of that year at AFTRS due to the bike crash, my parents were ferrying me around a lot. My dad used to relentlessly pitch ideas to Pat. The history of Australian fishing was the signature one, which made me cringe hard. She was always gracious, even when the ideas were total crap. That's from Sasha.
And just finally, all the way from Brazil, humanity, generosity, empathy. See, Paolo could take a brief. These are qualities of a great doco filmmaker and a great friend. I felt them in Pat's eyes from the moment I met her. She's a great team worker, and I feel privileged to have shared time with her. Paolo Alberton. So we should probably just leave it there with the voices of the past students and Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah.
But we won't leave it there because there were drama students at the film school, you might be surprised to know, but in those days they were forced to take a documentary course of 12 weeks and make a documentary. So now we'll hear from two of them, Beth Armstrong and Tim Kreibig. So let's just hear what they have to say.
Pat Fiske was the highlight of my time at film school. And I did drama directing. But back then we made one documentary. And there was competition between departments, baloney. But Pat didn't buy into that. She was just open-hearted and genuine. And besides sharing, her extensive knowledge and experience, what most affected me, or what was most memorable, was simply her encouragement. When my doco subject fell over at the last minute, I expected to be pilloried. But Pat's response was something like, well, you'll find something else. I'm really excited to see what you come up with. It was just so unexpected, but it really helped me to step up. And since I've sought Pat's advice, she's given me her time and support and an honest opinion, which I really value. When I think of Pat and when I see her at an event, I just think big smile, warm heart, clever, insightful, straight talker. I am proud to know her.
Hi Pat, I was very happy when I heard that everyone was going to get together to tell you how awesome you are. I certainly appreciated your mentorship and particularly how you taught as much with your knowledge and your experience as with your heart. And I will carry with me always the things I learned from the time that I worked with you, including now when I recorded this twice already and then thought, I should really do this with the lapel mic.
So cute. Well, you've seen a bit of Following the Fence Line, and you know that it was a very difficult film to make. The ABC was intrigued, but they didn't want a pre-sale, and funding organisations didn't come up with anything, and Erika was going to shoot it, and there was a producer, and anyway, in the end, Pat realised that she had to not only direct it, but shoot it and record it also. And however, being no fool, she knew she had to get an editor. So she rang the film school, and it seems to me, Sarah, was that you there?
Yep.
Sarah Bennett said, well, I've got one for you. And now we'll hear from the one. Karen?
Hello. Okay, I'll tell my version. Back in 1996, I had just finished my editing course at AFTRS and I was taking my first baby steps into the land of documentary editing. Out of the blue, Sarah Bennett, the head of AFTRS editing department, gave me a call and she said, Pat Fiske is looking for an editor for her latest documentary. Are you up for it? I was terrified. Pat was a goddess in my eyes. We had studied her films at film school. She'd even come and talked to us. I was a 27-year-old, totally green, straight out of school newbie with no clue what I was doing. How the hell could I take this on? I got a call from Pat. She'd just shot an epic road trip with a bunch of women riding motorbikes around Australia, spreading awareness about breast cancer. Not only had she produced it, shot it and directed it by herself, but she'd recorded the sound and funded it herself. Consequently, with only a little bit of money left, she needed someone cheap. And that was me. Sorry. Of course I said yes and leapt at the chance. We cut it in the old Film Australia building at Chris Rao's neg cutting place in a cupboard under the stairs. I think that we used shot lister and we cut it on pneumatic tape. I remember my first day so clearly. I was so nervous and terrified of blowing it. I kept saying the wrong things, and I had a terrible habit of being really sarcastic when I was nervous. And Pat would think I was being serious and critical, when really I was just freaking out. We went and had lunch on the Film Australia lawn while the kookaburras swooped and tried to steal our sandwiches. We worked out what the communication problem was, and we had a laugh, and I fell madly in love with her, and I have been ever since. Editing that film taught me so much about filmmaking, but also so much about being a woman. It was one of the first films that I have seen which showed women's bodies after a mastectomy and also post-reconstruction. The women in the film were so brave and open, but only because they completely trusted Pat. Through watching those rushes, I learnt about the importance of taking time to build a relationship with your characters, and I learnt that patience is the #1 skill to develop as an observational filmmaker. I also learnt that being a documentary maker takes stupendous amounts of tenacity and self-sacrifice, qualities which Pat has in droves. Pat was, and still is, an incredible role model for me. I was a timid, terrified girl, and she has shown me how to be a strong, courageous and independent woman. But the most important thing she's taught me is to speak up and to speak out, which in this day and age is more important than ever, and it's a lesson I'm now passing down to my kids. Pat, you're an inspiration and a dear friend, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all the jobs you've given me, for the films that you have made which educated me, for the support you gave me when I was pregnant, for the hours of life and work advice, and most of all, for just being you.
It happened so quickly. I mean, you do feel, after losing a part of your body, a shock does set in. It takes a while to even look at yourself in the mirror. But as time goes on, I mean, time's a great healer, and now it doesn't worry me so much. I think when I was fitted for my prosthesis, that was when I changed. It was back to sort of normal again. My doctor has asked me, several times, did I want to have a reconstruction? And that never really appealed to me.
One new boob.
Wow.
So which one is it?
Now, how long ago did you have that?
That's 8 years.
Wow, isn't that fantastic?
It's not quite 8 years because it won't be 8 years till October. You see the scarring goes right up there and right under here. And there's the little tuck I was telling you about, see? The dart. But this goes right up. It's from here, right the way up here. You can feel the edge of it. There.
That's the muscle.
That's the tummy that's been shaped. And it feels right in here because that was gone. Yeah. And it's right up here.
And Shelley, what kind of sensation do you have?
The skin sensation here, because that's my chest skin. But this was my tummy skin, and there's no real sensation there.
Yeah.
You're married?
Yes.
Do you mind me asking what your husband thinks of your reconstruction?
Oh, he's over the moon with it, yeah. It was a lot of my, not basically my decision was for myself.
Yeah.
But it was also for him because he was more conscious of the mastectomy than I was. If I had a sort of a V-neck blouse on and I used to tip forward, he'd just say to me, "It keeps showing," because I had a dip here. So he was more conscious of that. And although the prosthesis will fill the bra, they never fill that. That up the top.
That is just fantastic,
it's
isn't
terrific,
it?
isn't it?
Yes.
Now I'm that proud of it.
Yes.
I don't mind showing it.
A lot of them bared their whatever, and it was really amazing, and I felt really privileged to be there and filming it, and they just didn't care. There was one woman that said, no, I can't film. No, I don't want to. No. I said, that's okay. It doesn't matter. But if you ever feel like it, just let me know. And one day, halfway through, she came and she said, I'm ready now. And she had never filled a petrol tank. She was ever. in her life. This is the first time. She was one of the drivers and also had breast cancer, obviously. But she was, once she filled the tank the first time, she almost could do anything. It was really interesting because her husband always did it, but she did it.
And so are you going to tell us about the ABC?
Yes, I will. Okay, so the ABC and AFC had both said no, so I hadn't any money. And so I didn't think I'd be able to do it. But I had met the women several times, and we had hung out, and I think, all the while I was trying to raise money. And they said, oh, well, come anyway. You don't have to shoot. You just come. We love you, come. And so I thought, I can't go without a camera. So I bought a little DV camera and a couple radio mics. And I got the camera 2 days before that we were leaving, which didn't give me much time because sound was not a problem because I can do sound. It doesn't matter. I can boom and I shot and I boomed, because I did try the radio mics, but I kept losing track of them. And it's like, oh, that's too much. I can't do it. So, and I had about 3-4 hours training from David Bradbury, who had gotten a DV camera, the same DV camera.
They were new then?
They were brand new. I was, almost wasn't sure whether I was going to get it in time, but I did 2 days before. And so shooting, recording, directing, and trying to, think the story. I've got to get the story. 2 months on the road, 14-hour days, no days off. Those women they had this, they went to morning tea, lunch. They had all these things that they had to do. And even with the bikies in some towns. And it was incredible because they sometimes would come and ride out and ride them into town and ride them out, and they would raise money for them, although it wasn't a fundraiser, it was a raise awareness for breast cancer. But I was a little bit delirious by the end of it all because it took a lot out of me. And with some of the help with some of the women, we devised ways of, getting me some money along the way by selling DVDs, pre-selling DVDs. Someone said, why don't we sell? And so we made about $10,000. So that wasn't too bad. That helped a lot. And then afterward, the Cancer Council of New South Wales became an auspices, how do you say that? Auspice, and so we could get people to donate to the Cancer Council, and then they would get a tax deduction. That was way before our wonderful Documentary Australia Foundation. But there were ways of doing that too, so that helped as well once I got back. But after ABC said no, AFC said no, and but along the way, the head of documentary at the ABC rang me and said, how's it going? What's happening? You shot a lot, and he was really, excited. So I got excited too. It's like, wow. He said, bring some rushes when you get back. And so I got back and I was like, and I just said, okay, rushes, all right. So I got some rushes together and sent him to dropped him in at the ABC. Well, I have never done that again because I don't think people can watch rushes. They have to watch scenes. They might get an idea, even those people, commissioning editors. And I got back this comment saying, can't see a film in it. I could see a film in it. Karen could see a film in it. And but of course, when we finished the film and showed it to the ABC, they wanted it, they loved it. They didn't want any changes. They was just like, oh, this is so great. Thanks. Because of course they don't pay as much, as an acquisition as they do when it's a pre-sale or a post-production pre-sale. So, that's what I want to say.
Yeah. And now you want to move on and
Yes.
introduce your next person.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, you can read. See, I can on my glasses so we can see. Kathy Scott.
Do you want to say anything?
I first met Pat in 1997 or 98. I'd just been living in New York and had a kind of similar background in a way. I was hanging out with a ragtag group of people called Paper Tiger TV, which was kind of like the New York version of the film collective, the documentary collective. And I had... I'd been in New York for quite a while and I'd done quite a few films, and I had this idea to do this story about private prisons. And I went to the ABC and they were like, oh, we know what kind of films you make. You're an agitprop type person and this, that and the other, and sort of directed that there wasn't really a place for the films that I make at the ABC at that time. So about 3 different people said, you know what, you should meet this amazing filmmaker called Pat Fiske. She would be great. You should just team up with her. You could really get this thing going if you could just team up with Pat. So seriously, like 3 different people. So I finally gave Pat a call, and I had had a few rushes and that I'd shot, and it was kind of documentary love at first sight, really, for me. And I hope it was for you too, Pat. And Pat agreed to sort of take me on, and Pat was obviously, as you all know, a fabulous director in her own right, and I was sort of asking her to sort of produce, which was a whole new thing to ask of Pat, and I think she was a bit, I'm not quite sure. But she was tremendous and really probably wouldn't have happened without teaming up with Pat for a variety of reasons. She has a great ability to see kind of what you need and help you kind of get there. She is incredibly passionate and driven, which is what it takes to get these films up. So in order to move forward, we decided to create a production company together called Paradigm Pictures. And to seal the deal, I was new and I was hanging out with my parents, and I really wanted my parents to meet Pat and everything like that. My dad, he was called Big Al, and he had what we called a BS detector, a bullshit artist detector, and he always wanted to suss out my friends. Anyway, we went and had a wonderful lunch at the Bondi Trap together with Pat. And, you know, Pat's sort of, you know, radical, you know, lefty unionist. My dad was like a very conservative insurance man from the North Shore. And my mum was the housewife who worked in a shop. And Pat just charmed the absolute pants off my parents. We had the longest lunch, many wines. And my dad turned to me and he said, you better stick with her. She'll stand by you no matter what. And that was sort of sealed the deal. And Pat and I sort of created, you know, the Paradigm Pictures, and we went on to create 3 documentaries. Obviously, Business Behind Bars, which after not being good enough for the ABC was commissioned by SBS and won a Walkley Award. And then we made Selling Sickness, and obviously the last one that we made together was Scarlet Road, which was our favourite and most special film together. And actually Rachel's here in the audience to celebrate you as well, Pat. I think the thing for me that's really important to acknowledge with Pat is the kind of creative generosity. You know, we live in this is a very competitive field. Everyone's sort of trying to sort of outdo each other. We're all competing for limited pools of money, and Pat just is incredibly generous. And I think for me to have somebody who has all those years and wealth of experience and knowledge, and to rally and to support and to mentor me as a director was just incredible, and it's the greatest gift that you can give somebody. And I think that I've been a great beneficiary of your mentorship, and I know you've gone on to mentor many other people and in this room, but for me, I think I wouldn't be the filmmaker I am today, Pat, without your incredible act of creative generosity. And so I thank you for that, and I'd like to end on a clip of Scarlet Road. This is one of our favourite scenes. And enjoy, and just, I love you very much, Pat. Thank you.
I ideally would love him to have someone to be there for him.
Lead me to the pub.
Particularly now that we are getting older, and you know, he needs to have, everybody needs to have that certain somebody just to hold hands with.
So you like my hair? You just want to look at my ass, don't you?
I do not have a girlfriend, so I cannot share my feelings with just one person.
Thank you.
Rachel makes me feel like I have a girlfriend, but I know she is a sex worker.
G'day, I'm
Hello,
here.
you're late.
I
What have you
know.
been doing?
I'm always late.
Yeah. Well, we've
I'm
got a
here.
lot of work here to do.
Got to get these, all won't be able to carry it. How hard do you want it?
Make it as hard as you can.
Yeah, okay. We always share a laugh. With all my clients, you speak about what's going on in your immediate life or things that you're planning for in the future, people's fears or expectations. I should be taking you out. It seems a bit backwards, doesn't it? I know.
This will be the first time you've made a bed spag. Oh, got it around the wrong way.
You're the woman, not me.
Ready? Go. Okay. 8 out of 10. Do I get a gold star? I'm always blessed with that. They trust me a lot. So I may be standing on someone's bed or holding onto the ceiling, or, you know, if someone has a limited mobility, then how are they ever going to be able to see up someone's dress? If that's a fantasy, I mean, that's a pretty harmless fantasy, but it's one I want to give someone if that's what they like. So, you know, they trust me to be able to stand above them. Are you okay there? Yes? You want juice? You're not choking? Okay. My greatest fear.
Geez, I might sleep here tonight instead.
Chockies, some petals.
I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. The Queen wouldn't even get this, I don't think. I'd be a bit worried if she'd done that for me. Are these the fair dinkum ones?
Yes, of course they're they're fair dinkum ones.
Oh.
They're rose petals.
Yeah, they are too.
Yes. Beautiful. Hope you're learning from this fag.
That film speaks for itself. Because we have another person that you are currently working with.
Yes.
And that's Jane Castle.
Pat took that photo. Just another example of her multiple talents at a Dawn shoot recently. I first met Pat actually when I was 18 on the set of On Guard, a feminist thriller from the 1980s with an all-women crew. Some of you, I think, were on it. And I was an intern in the lighting department and Pat was a sound recordist. And one of the big things I learnt on that shoot was don't mess with the sound department. And don't light them out if you're a cinematographer. And what I learned about Pat was that she tells it like it is, and it was a good lesson as a soon-to-be cinematographer. Consider the sound department. I then went on to work with Pat on a range of social justice documentaries, and it was fantastic to find someone with really similar political values and
you know, it's demonstrated in all her films, but what I've found working with her is that those values are not just skin deep, they're demonstrated in, you know, how Pat operates on a day-to-day basis, and, you know, values like inclusion and collaboration and equity, they're just on display. And another great value is honesty, and it's been mentioned here a lot tonight, but, you know, with Pat, what you see is what you get. And it can be scary at times, especially when you have to tell Pat that the film is still not finished. But it also makes for a really fabulous working environment and communication, because it's really clean, it's really clear, you just cut to the chase, say what's needed, there's no, you know, murky shadows or hidden agendas, and it's a lovely working experience, and it's really efficient and productive. So I've really enjoyed that. And what I've learned about Pat is that, you know, it's been said here again and again, but she just keeps showing up. And no matter what curved balls come her way, and we've had some very curvy balls, she shows up and she just meets them with pragmatism and positivity. And, you know, as people have said, she's a problem solver. And she's also very versatile. So some of the things she's been doing are like, I think you found the one telephone expert in Australia that could tell us how long it was between the rings of a 1970s telephone to negotiating with Prince's estate in Paisley Park, or sometimes it's called begging, but, you know, bringing fresh pastries to a dawn shoot and, you know, like thermos of tea and turning up time after time. You know, Pat often says this thing, I just feel it in my bones. I just feel it in my bones, and she won't let it go. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And then eventually, you know, she's right, and we need to do the thing that she suggested.
In the good old days, when we had Film Australia, we also had Sharon Connolly. And you were going to say that she came to Sydney, and when she came to Sydney from Melbourne, where she'd been doing some films, she stayed with you.
Yeah, for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But I worked, I've sound recorded on her and Trevor Graham's first couple films as well, travelled with them, and so I got to know Sharon very well.
And Sharon has just a little clip, I don't know about what, but Sharon is one of the most politically astute people about many things, including documentary survival. But do they listen? No. So let's hear from Sharon.
Hello Pat, it's Sharon here. I heard this OzDox event is being called a salute to Pat Fiske, which seemed rather odd to me because I think most of us would rather give you a great big hug. But anyway, down here in Hobart, I've been saluting away while looking for the notes I made when you were awarded the Stanley Hawes for your contribution to documentary. I thought maybe I could recycle a few words. You were the first woman to receive that award, and it was more than well deserved even then, which was 18 years ago. So actually, even if I could find my notes, they'd be out of date, because we've been fortunate to have nearly 2 decades more of your work. Thank you, Pat, for all of it, for your films, your mentoring, your commitment, your generosity, your friendship. You are the real documentary deal. I'm saluting. With a feminist raised fist, of course.
Now, Pat,
yes,
we're going to move right along because we're hoping to save just a few minutes for people to have the open mic. Because we also have a few more clips from different people, including Paige Livingston, Michael Gissing, and Kim Beamish. And why don't we just have them?
Yep, we'll just have them.
Yeah,
Kim is in Vietnam, Paige is in Adelaide, and Michael Gissing, of course, is in Cygnet, Tasmania.
Pat, I want to say that it's been an amazing journey, and I have enjoyed every minute of working with you. I have learnt so much from you, and I respect you so much. You have been honest with me all of the time, and you are always honest with me. It's because of this that we have made such a great film, and we got to eat many of our lead characters. I hope you enjoy the evening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your journey, and I really hope that I get to bump into you more along the way. It's big congratulations from Abby, Tom, Bridget and myself. I love you, Pat, and as I said, I hope to get to bump into you more. And calm the bloods. Thanks, Pat.
Patty Puddin' Pie, greetings from Adelaide. I'm so sorry that I'm not there for your salute to you. An extraordinary filmmaker. You are an incredible practitioner. You're way ahead of your time, generous, and a very caring, attentive, seasoned pro. Oz is lucky to have you. But what I really wanted to talk about was how much I value our friendship. We live around the corner from each other. We often walk our dogs up at the North Bondi Golf Course. And you have an amazing ability to just be there. You're a great listener. You're non-judgmental, which does not go unnoticed. Some things about Pat. Pat is scarily punctual. She's an amazing cook. She cuts vegetables into beautiful little tiny pieces, which has earned her the name of Cubist. When Pat suggests a film, go and see it. She's usually right. She has impeccable taste. The other thing that you might know about Pat is that she's incredibly competitive. We have long evenings playing Rummikub, and she's vicious, and will keep playing until she wins a round. Thank you, that's Chewy. Thank you for dressing up as Super Mario on Halloween. Thank you for being the door bitch at Dexter's 16th birthday party. And thank you for driving me to the airport at 6 a.m. Who does that? But the thing that I love most about Pat Fiske is your conscious effort to make the world a better place. And although I'm still trying to get my head around recycling chicken neck plastic baggies, still working on that one, Pat, you inspire me to want to be a better person. And I cannot thank you. There's just no greater gift that one person can give another. So tonight I shall raise a glass of red, of course filtered through the aerator, and honor and celebrate you, who has given so much of yourself to others. I love you, Pat Fiske.
Hi, Pat. Sorry I can't be there tonight. I'm sitting under my apricot tree in Tasmania. We're just watching the fruit grow, which is very nice. Congratulations on the recognition you're receiving tonight. I think it's so richly deserved. You've had a stellar career in documentaries. You've covered a huge range of subjects, topics. You've touched the people you've worked with and the audiences that have seen your films. And you so richly deserve to be recognised for the vital and important contribution you have made to the Australian documentary industry. I know our collaborations go back to about 1995. I think the first film we worked on was a documentary about Doc Evett. And in that you introduced me to Andrew Plain, and that was a wonderful thing. Andrew was the sound editor and I mixed that film. That would have been the first film I mixed for you. Over the years we've worked on numerous other films with terrific collaborating directors like Kathy Scott and Aman Palangi. And it's just, there's been so many wonderful projects we've worked on. I know I shouldn't have favourites, but amongst all of the docos I've worked on, I have to rate Scarlet Road as one of the best docos. Well, one of the most enjoyable for me to have worked on. The subject matter was fantastic. If people don't know this film, they really should see it. But it's just one of many great films that you have made over a stellar and wondrous career. One of the things that I have most enjoyed about working together with you, Pat, has just been the social aspect, the friendship that we've developed, the wonderful times you've come down to Tasmania to work on your films. We've spent time eating and drinking together. It's been fantastic. I really value and appreciate your friendship above all else. So congratulations, enjoy your night. See ya.
What an amazing night. It's absolutely incredible. Living next to you and stepping over the BLF sign for how many years. And I remember getting a VHS of Woolloomooloo and Rocking the Foundations and watching it and getting it. And so tonight has been incredible, understanding how you all together grew an industry. You did this, and this has just been amazing. We love you so much.
Thanks. Well, this looks to be about it. So I want to do a few thank yous. First of all, to Sandy Edwards, who's down there. And when Tom said there was a group of, screen printers and photographers, there she was. And here she is today, still here. And for some reason, because of her beautiful character, I just have to put this in. All her pictures of people are just beautiful. And we also want to thank the Australian Directors Guild, and it's very important to know that we're part of the Australian Directors Guild, which is now a union fighting for directors in many ways. And if you're not a member, please, go on the website, consider it. It's really a great support, and in hard times we need to band together, and that's the way we do it. We also want to thank the film school for hosting this, and particularly there's a very handsome young man named James Cox, who's the program and events manager, and he is really good at things. So he's organised us beautifully. So we really thank him. The other person we always thank is Alan Butterfield, what I would call... He's our projectionist. I've got a list here. And also we want to thank Josh and Carly Marks because Josh, and I don't know how Carly fits into this, but there she is somewhere out in space watching through in the other... We have another room. So we thank those people in that room. And Carly and Josh have a baby who's come to this event. And also on camera we have Rod Friedman and Brendan Stretch, who also does all our... Brendan Stretch, God, I've been thrown back into past. That was
Senior moment.
Yeah. Brendan, who also does our posters and lots of things. He's just a stalwart of the group. And the rest of the Pat Knight committee, especially Tom Zubrycki and Rod again and Felicity Blake. And also Pat again for her wonderful company, her contribution to collective life in documentary and beyond, and of course for her films. Yay!
Thank you so much. I'm a bit overwhelmed, and it'll take me a while to come down to earth.